Hello and welcome. My name is Danielle Burrow, and I'm excited to have you with us for today's webinar on accelerating business agility with software agility. We're very fortunate to have two special guests with us today sharing their insights on this topic. With us from IDC is Rick Villars. Rick is the Group Vice President of Worldwide Research at IDC and is IDC's Chief Analyst guiding research on the future of the IT industry. And we're also joined by Purnima Padmanabhan, the General Manager and Vice President of the Tanzu Division of Broadcom. Tanzu solutions are designed to make cloud-native software delivery easier and more efficient at scale so that teams can move faster and focus on building applications that really differentiate their business. Rick's going to start us off with some of his research on challenges, solutions, and trends that many of you are thinking about as you aim to deliver the best digital experience for your customers, while also navigating a very complex technology landscape, including generative AI. And Purnima and Rick will discuss how they're seeing the research findings kind of manifest for organizations in the real world that they're working with. And we'll also hear a little bit how the Tanzu platform can address the challenges of improving speed and simplicity of app delivery so that these large organizations can really respond to business needs much faster. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Rick.
As we all know, the last year was pretty interesting. So at IDC, we spent a lot of time talking on a regular basis with IT leaders, CIOs, CTOs around the world. And when we checked in with them a year ago, there was a clear message around concerns around the economic environment, things like a potential recession, concerns around inflation affecting their business outcome, but a continual factor that we've seen for many years now, which is that concern around, do they have the right staff with the right skills and the right resources to accomplish their business goals, and having technology do that. Now, the challenge with this is, in a lot of ways, we saw a lot of companies reacting to those concerns around cost and concerns as a way to say, we're going to narrow our options. We're going to have to restrain our goals and our activities. And so we're going to, maybe not stop modernization, but we're going to prioritize short-term issues or short-term challenges versus thinking about the long-term strategic decisions. Now, if we jump forward to today and we really think about what's happening, and we're talking to CIOs in the last month or two, we've seen a complete turnaround. So now if we talk about what's happening in 2024, those concerns around the economy, they've gone to the side a little bit. Nobody is assuming that everything's going to be great, but they understand that they can't just focus on that narrow issue. They have to get back to focusing on transforming their business, becoming a much more important partner to their customers, and investing in technology to do that. Their concern as they're coming into this is a lot, what are the things that are stopping me from making those technology investments? And the top one that came across again and again was concerns around the tech supply chain. Now, everybody thinks that's about processors or chips, but it's not. When we talk to CIOs and IT leaders, it's about how quickly can they bring new technology, new capabilities, and deliver those into the applications and the digital services that they are building their businesses on. And what do they do to make sure that they have consistency and scale in those investments, and they can show the return on that. Now, that's also come into concerns around staffing and labor that go along with that. But again, a much more narrow focus and emphasis on those development teams who are at the core of that business transformation, making sure they have the right staff in there, but they're also tracking and they're able to understand how effective they are at delivering new services and capabilities. The big new thing, as we all know over the last year, is the emergence of AI, and particularly genAI, as part of this conversation. And while not most companies aren't talking about building giant large language models and investing in all that, they all understand the critical importance of bringing their data and leveraging these new technologies and embedding them into their application modernization and new development processes in the coming year. But they want to do it in a way that they aren't building up technical debt or raising costs in a way that they can't keep track of over time. So, what we hear, it's very much focused on now on how do we accelerate innovation? What platform can we do to make sure that our own application development and our use of other applications is always focusing on going faster, but in a way that's cost effective, and increasingly because of AI, I have the confidence and trust that the data underlying it is going to be used in an effective way. So that's what we've been hearing. But I'd be interested, Purnima, you've been out talking to customers and companies as well in the last year. Have you heard anything different, or what's the message you've been hearing?
I would say pretty much what we are hearing is very similar, very similar. And when you talk about the tech supply chain, it makes sense, but it's tied to even a one level higher objective, like you were saying, which is I need to get applications and make changes to my applications much faster than I did ever before. Because the only way I react to changing market conditions is by changing my business app, right? Whether I need a new way to let my consumers collect their purchases, whether I need to change, uh, add something in my trading. So, across all sectors, the speed with which you are able to change your applications so that you can drive business agility has become very important. And tied to that is, of course, how do I have the right scaffolding, tech scaffolding, to be able to make my business changes fast? And tied to it is, do I also have the right skill set? Because if everybody has to know everything, it slows down, right? So do I have the right skill sets and the right processes to deliver my applications fast? And tied to that is the AI conversation, right? Not only is it I need to deliver these business apps fast, I need to be able to separate the skill sets so that everybody doesn't need to know everything. And I need to be able to incorporate AI and the power of Gen AI without necessarily hiring a whole bunch of PhDs who are doing model building, right? And so this is the set of concerns. And as you said, swirling around all these concerns is also I want to get all of the speed, but I'm not going to compromise on security, CVEs, risks, and I'm not going to. I really have to manage costs because while I'm placing these large orders for infrastructure or buying in more capacity, I need to manage the cost around it.
Yeah, no, dead on, and I think you've highlighted that point of, this, as we say, is giving developers and the teams more insights and allowing them to make decisions earlier in the processes that prevent that risk, whether it's security or loss of data, or that, again, excessive cost overruns in the long term. It's part of this mindset of we have seen people coming back to thinking about this is a living services. This is going to go on forever. And it's not a one-time thing, and we want it to continue to improve, not like you said, on not a yearly basis or a monthly basis even, but even more frequently than that. But I can't lose control while I'm doing that, and that's the big
Correct.
emphasis.
And Gen AI is just a new technology that is now very critical, but something else will come in. But what is consistent is
Yeah,
look, the velocity of business is directly tied to the velocity of my
yeah,
applications change, how my applications change.
yeah. No, I think we're in agreement here. I think, one other thing that we do when we do these conversations is, we do go back to the economic issue. Is like, okay, one way to understand people's real priorities, if you say, okay, you're going to have less money because there's a recession or something, what do you not cut on? Where do you keep spending the money? And so this is, the latest insight we've got on this in this prioritization. And, we've been asking this now for over 18 months. And there's about 12 different things that we that are looking at, from modernizing your devices, your data center, investing in professional services. But what we've seen here, and this is the latest view, is very interesting. One point, not a surprise, security always finishes at the top of the list, is the thing that most people say we're not going to cut. But one of the things we've always said is there's a growing frustration there. Is like, I'm spending more on security, but do I feel more confident? Which is, do I want to spend less on all these little utilities and tools, or do I have to implement processes that are inherently secure so that I have that confidence in it? The other big one that's tied into what we saw over the last year with optimization is that IT optimization, IT operations optimization, and that one's held up there as well. AI is a new person in here. 6 months ago, this wasn't even on the board, and now it's up at number 3. But what we find is the other two, and there's a connection between those, because when you really think about AI and automation initiatives, those are proof of concepts, initial production rollouts, and other things. And again, what people are trying to avoid is creating a million separate AI silos that are all independent, where there's no consistency, there's no reuse of knowledge and insights and whatever. And they've all clearly said, the platform we're going to use built on an app platform model that allows us to tie the application development elements and the data analytics together. So we have that kind of data management services. We need to start thinking about this as a single new investment. And that's where we're seeing this rise in priority. And when we've asked people, okay, so you're increasing your Gen AI budget, well, where did the money come from? Or where did you put the money for Gen AI even? Like how much did it do it? So security, again, not surprised, but they're very clear. It's about data loss, protecting intellectual property and the knowledge around it. But the number two was we have to start thinking about this, taking this platform, AI app development platform mindset and putting it in place as an organization, or else these are never going to scale and we're not going to be productive over time. I'd be interested as you've navigated with your customers who also want to have the AI conversation and understand what you're doing to help with them. What are the key things that you've been talking to them about that really, the fundamentals that they can build on to make that work?
Rick, when it comes specifically to AI, of course, there isn't a single customer conversation where we are not having that.
Us too.
And I would say it splits in two sections. One part is how do I create and have the right type of operational infrastructure to allow for AI, ML workloads and Gen AI workloads to run, right? Do I have the right infrastructure? Do I have the right automation? Do I have the right processes? Do I have the right runtimes to instantiate these models and run them? And a lot of conversations in the industry has been around that. The second part of the conversation, which I'm seeing more of, is if you look at a lot of the Gen AI work, it is done classically in Python. And a lot of the enterprise applications are written in Java. So the conversation a lot of times is how now, okay, I've got this great AI infrastructure. Maybe I'm also using out of the box models, right? Existing pre trained models. But how do I incorporate the right set of capabilities into my application so that I can showcase the power of the AI, ML models into my applications, right? Ultimately, is my customer service better because of it? Is my what do you call it, interaction with the purchasing department better than it was before, right? So these are the kinds of outcomes that they are looking to drive, and that is another set of conversations. How can I easily access my data? How can I easily instantiate enterprise context for this AI/ML? How can I easily incorporate the right types of calls into these models and right types of capabilities into these models as part of my application that is an existing application, right? So that I can, let us say, I've got a customer service support center. Now, it is already an existing app, but now suddenly I've got a Gen AI enabled capability that launches, right? So a lot of times you're not instantiating just Gen AI on its own, but you're leveraging the power of Gen AI against the data,
Mhm.
the against the warehouse that you may have,
Mhm.
and against the application that you may have.
Yeah. No, you've highlighted, and I think I agree with you 100%. There's clearly a lot of people have focused on that infrastructure side and getting pieces. When we talk to the companies who've already made the serious investments, who've done their proof of concept, who are even rolling out production now,
Yeah.
it's pivoted to the second side. It's this. These are the things that make this a sustainable model that we have, or a sustainable business tool that we need to do with it. And it's interesting as you highlight it, not a single one of them says we're doing AI or Gen AI just to do AI. It is we have a business goal, we have a business requirement in mind. And as a matter of fact, when we went out and we asked those same IT leaders, so what are you hearing from the C-suite? Because that's a great way to understand, what's the priority, what's the business priority? Because one thing we've also learned is this AI conversation is definitely a top-down phenomenon. While we have lots of people and analysts or whatever or employees who've played with and tested it, CEOs have decided this is disruptive to their business. If they don't react to it, they won't change. And they have been very clear with the IT organization on what their priorities are. And what we've seen is just like you said, it's not just Gen AI, or it's not as an individual thing. It's how do we embed or leverage technologies, AI now, but as you said, go forward, additional capabilities and functions as we see there, into our customer engagement and, solutions and what we do there. How do we tie this into our business operations and our decision making around all those things to make better decisions? And in many companies, and it, like you called out call centers, we see definitely many organizations where this is about improving our employees, making our employees more effective at delivering the services and capabilities that we want to our customers. That's step one. The next thing we always get into with these companies, they said, where are we going to get the money to do this? How are we going to fund this investment? And we get an interesting dynamic here between those companies who've already made significant investments, have launched some products, versus the bigger number who are still in the proof of concept stage. And we would say most companies are still figuring it out, not in the investment. But both sides say clearly the people who've already made the money said this is a new business, this is a new workload, this is a new strategic investment the company has to make, and we have to take a platform approach to make sure we can scale this over time. But across the board, whether they're doing it now or whether they're getting ready to do it, they also recognize that one of the most critical things they need to tie this into is their existing application modernization and digital transformation, new service creation activities and services, because this is where the value is. It has to tie into those things. And the messages come down. That means don't do GenAI separately. Do it in the apps. Do it in the customer service. How do we bring that in, embed that capability in a way that's useful and scalable? How do we do that in our employee services? How do we do that in operations? So as we would say, GenAI may be the new tool. It is the bright, shiny tool for right now. But what companies and what we're hearing from companies is, but it can't just be a standalone. It has to make what we do better. And we need to have the confidence in a platform that allows us to use all the tools that are coming along to make that happen. I'd love to know, do you have any particular, companies you've talked to or examples of people who've taken that kind of step and really prioritized, different use cases, whether that's customer or employee or, decision making type things?
Yeah, when it comes to AI ML, the primary use cases that we are seeing are around, as I said, some kind of improvement in experience, whether it is customer experience, partner experience, employee experience, in that order. That seems to be a big category. And then the second category is really being able to harness enterprise data and make it more available, right? So that is where we see almost an intersection with some of the other things. And given that we, in addition to, and we'll talk a little bit about what we do as a platform, but a lot of conversations happen on an app platform level, but also at a data level. And so, especially with our data conversations, we are saying, okay, how can I normalize my data? How can I make it available in such a way that I can put the power of generative AI is being able to have that natural language interface and unlock the hidden gems in the data that are there for an enterprise. So we see those two as really prominent examples of what people are doing. And a lot of times they're using, as I would say, pre-existing models and pre-trained models for specific use cases, and then augmenting it with their
Yeah.
enterprise context.
So now I know you spend a lot of time obviously with the enterprise application teams and then
Yes.
also the development teams. What are the things you've been hearing from those teams about, how, and I'm not saying AI all the time, but how has their role over the last year evolved as more and more they've been asked to think about this sort of broader view of how to incorporate technology into what they're doing and how they want to manage it? Are there any particular things you've seen that that people have called out as this is important? We need to have this, or we need to have the confidence that we can address those issues.
Yeah, I think in general, with AI, but also even independent of AI, Gen
Mhm.
AI, there are some trends that are very critical. As your application, if you're just doing packaged apps or static apps, the way you think about automation is very different. But since most of the enterprises that we talk to write purpose built applications to meet their business needs and have to change these applications on a continuous basis, I'm talking about not 10 times 10 times a month or something like that. I'm talking about thousands of changes and happening right over the entire year. 10,000, 14,000 changes type of thing. So when you have to do that, fundamentally automation has to be more dynamic. And that is where, whether they call it that term or not, Rick, that is where a lot of the term of I need an app platform. I've already automated my infrastructure. And whether I'm going to a private cloud or a public cloud, I think most people now have made the idea of an IaaS pretty consistent. So I've got a standard set of, compute network storage capabilities that I'm reflecting. But then I also need an app platform because consumption of IaaS by itself for developers at that speed is very high. And so, what an app platform has to do is, as code changes, as new business logic comes in, can I do the dynamic automation to understand what the app needs and then deploy it based on the developer intent? And this is something that I would say a discipline. You almost say think of that them as platform teams or platform engineering. So the enterprise architecture team that you always knew of, right, are also defining now what an app platform should look like. What are the capabilities? How does it make sure? How does it take something that is a code that has been built and checked in, and how do you kind of securely build it? How do you make sure you cost it? How do you evaluate it? And how do you deploy it across the diverse infrastructure that they may have? And this emergence of this platform team is something that we are seeing not only in these large enterprises,
Mhm.
but in also smaller, I would say, businesses where the software velocity is critical. So it's actually tied to the software velocity.
No, I agree with you. I mean, one thing that we've seen, and again, a lot of the CIOs we talking about are the larger enterprises with a very diverse portfolio of things. Is we absolutely hear them talk about even the transition from an app platform discussion to an enterprise app platform discussion. They
Yes,
really are trying. We have to start applying this
make it
discipline
standardized.
at a
Yes,
very broader level of the company
yes,
for across multiple business units. Again, the desire in the future to leverage the data associated with AI is only accelerating that because
yes,
we can't have data in silos anymore either. We have to have a
that's it.
common, and we have to expose all the developers. Therefore, have to be tapping into the same sources to really make that work. So I see
I mean,
exactly what
that's a
you
great point, Rick, which
yeah.
is, and sorry to jump in here, but
No.
you're making this point. Platform teams earlier were just like individual,
Mhm.
application teams. But
Yeah.
what has happened is these platform teams are housed in the
Yeah.
IT organization with the CIO. And what you're defining is an enterprise app platform. And what you're saying is, look, I'm not going to have a different. This is what we often call also the golden paths to production. The idea is
Mhm.
you don't have a dedicated path for each and every application, but you have this consistent approach. And that's
Mhm.
where you get speed and velocity without compromising security.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's exact the same message we hear. That's their goal. That's why they're doing it. And they understand the importance of doing it. So I thought I wanted to leave, and I think we have a lot of conversation to go, but we also have pulled together a sort of keys to success when we talk to companies about how do they think through this next year or two and what do it. So first of all, as I think we've made clear in this conversation, AI is not all the world. Everybody still has to run their businesses and transact and do commerce and engage with customers and everything else. But we do believe it is disrupting how they think about their business. They want to incorporate it into it. But what we're also hearing is that they're very clear, like, yeah, what we see today and what people talk about are productivity use cases, like let's help a team or one individual group do it. That's not our goal. This has to be part of us accelerating our business, creating and launching whole new products and services, and driving revenue growth. And that is very much in alignment if I need that enterprise application platform to make that happen. The second big thing, which we've also delved a lot into, is the data, the connection to the data in this. What people say is, I need to accelerate the modernization of my application so I can get the data out of them more effectively. Then I also need to have we would almost call it, the data model depot, where they have a way of organizing all the insights and knowledge inside the organization and understand how it's being used and it's being prevented. And that's where they need that platform to be tied into data services, a strong portfolio of data services that allow them to start doing this. And then the last step of this is, as we're talking to companies, is as we think about the long-term goals here and what they're trying to do here, is it's about how do I, as we've talked about, is it's not individual applications or point solutions. It's about how do we make this sort of more intelligent way of operating an inherent part of our business model. And what do we need to do that? So when we do these kinds of platforms, we have to think the long game. We have to think the long-term value of this service and this capability, because it's now maybe our next new major product line is going to be based on this application and service. They need the insights, as we would say, almost the intelligence about what's going on in their application base in order to make that happen. And that's what we tell them. These are the kind of three priorities we say is think about a common platform that ties in the data, but also delivers the insight, because that's how you're going to succeed going forward. I'm interested in, and I've noticed, how you all at Tanzu have talked about what you're doing. It seems like we have a lot of alignment about what we're thinking right now.
I would say the words might be slightly different, but it is, the gist of what you're saying is essentially what we are saying. And so, how do we kind of summarize what is Tanzu, right? And often in the past, Tanzu has been associated with a lot of underlying technologies, right? Like Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes or so on. But at the core, if you outside of technologies and assume technology is a means to an end, Tanzu is all about how can we, our goal is to help customers accelerate their application delivery, right? So that they can operate at the speed of the business. And when we start talking to the customers on what, we always start the conversation with, what is your business application need, right? What is it that you're trying to develop? What is it that you're trying to get to market? How quickly do you want to get it to market? How quickly do you want to make changes? How many geos do you want it to be available? And when we ask that top level question, often we say, hey, we need all of it. We need to go faster. We need to be able to use Kubernetes. And that's why we are using Kubernetes. We are using open source. We are using clouds. So, from what happens is from the outcomes, it quickly becomes a technology conversation because customers are trying to wrap their arms around, and now GenAI models, etc., around a whole bunch of technology choices to say, how do I bring all of them ultimately to deliver the app velocity that I need? And that is why the status quo is very hard. When it comes to software, I have to think about libraries, I have to think about dependencies, I have to think about build systems. When it comes to application platform, how do I create the automation at scale? How do I create an application runtime that understands the notion of HA, scale in and scale out, the notion of being able to optimize the decisions based on cost or performance? And how do I have an infrastructure? Most of the times, if it's public cloud, I have a clean IaaS. But if it's a private cloud, how do I pull that right cloud like infrastructure that gives me the set of IaaS services? We came up, we said we have to look at the platform approach, right? Like you said, an enterprise platform approach, not an approach where you're saying you're doing individual things for individual development teams. But imagine if you had an approach where you said that, look, first thing is, as you're thinking about application velocity, or developer experience has to be very simple. A developer has to build business logic. We can't do anything about it, right? That is not where we help. But once the business logic has been created, how do you simplify the developer experience so that things like, hey, build it into a container, secure it for me, deploy it with HA, deploy it with encryption, scale it out? These are the commands that developers need without ever having to wonder what kind of Kubernetes configuration is there, without having to ever wonder which cloud it is going on, maybe because you have decided at the IT level to define based on your enterprise needs. So, a simple first tenet we are saying is we have to provide the industry with this app platform, right? The app platform itself is run by IT, by CIOs, and by platform teams, but the developers should be able to have a simple set of commands to build, bind, deploy, scale on their applications. The second one is an app platform sits on top of an IaaS. And what it should be able to do is translate dynamically the application needs, right? When you have an IaaS, you might do a blueprint, like a Terraform blueprint, to say, hey, I need to configure my infrastructure ABC, but it's rigid. What an app platform does is, when you get, in order to operationalize the application, you may have application characteristics. And you want those application characteristics to be dynamically understood and translated into the underlying infrastructure. And that is what operations tenet means. And finally, once an application is deployed, you don't stop there, right? You have to continuously update, scale out, optimize the app based on the characteristics of the app. So, our thought was, imagine if we could give an industry an app platform that is based on these three tenets. You are able to have simple developer experience, you are able to operate on any IaaS infrastructure dynamically, and you're able to scale and optimize the app based on performance characteristics on an ongoing basis. And that is what we call the Tanzu platform. It allows you to develop, operate, and optimize your applications at scale and do it across any platform, be it private cloud or public cloud. And underneath the Tanzu platform, essentially, we, Rick, are offering application runtimes, two types of runtimes, either a Cloud Foundry based runtime, which has been we've been pioneered in that space, or a Kubernetes based runtime. But that is just a choice, a decision you're making. But the core tenets of the platform stay consistent across both of those. So, as I said, Tanzu platform that allows you to develop, operate, and optimize your applications at scale. And Rick, you mentioned data cannot be thought of independent of just the application business logic. And so Tanzu data services are fully enabled now with our vector database capabilities, whether it's PG Vector, whether it's Gemfire, whether it's Greenplum for warehousing. And they are truly combined with that application layer that we talked about with Tanzu platform, so that your enterprise applications can leverage the power of GenAI within your platform. So Tanzu platform and Tanzu data goes together, and the Tanzu labs and essentially helps customers make the right decisions on how to develop a platform, where to deploy. So because it's not just about technology, it's also about best practices, and that's what we bring to the table.
Oh, I have to agree with you on this last one. Just you highlight this as we highlighted before. It's the skills issues, the challenge issues. But a lot of what people want is I need the insights. And I know that's not going to come through some magic AI. It's I have to have a partnership with a company who can
Yes.
help provide the insights, who can help us get things going and share the knowledge on how to do things the best. And that's one of the big pluses we hear again and again of companies when they're prioritizing this now. That willingness to engage and connect not just at sort of a basic support level, but for deeper understandings of the business models and the technology evolution is a critical ask that companies have. So I did have one thing on this. Is it is I think you've laid out exactly the same message we hear in Philly. One note that we hear a lot is one, and I think it very much emphasizes your note about many companies as they're going to this next stage. This is inherently a multi-cloud conversation. Uh, because right now they want to access to the best technology, the best data, the best services, wherever those happen to be, especially when we get into this sort of sovereignty issues that are coming up more and more for companies in their business models. So having a platform that gives you that choice and that flexibility and navigates and does a lot of the automation across those environments at the infrastructure level and even at some of the basic security and platform levels, it's a big plus. It's where we see companies most want to use automation in their IT role is in this area. So I think you're absolutely tying into what is a high ask that we're hearing from companies as they're going forward right now. As we've pointed out a lot today, companies' priorities on digital transformation have been going on for more than a decade. But Gen AI, without a doubt, has accelerated the urgency for many companies right now in terms of their thinking about how quickly they need to respond and where do they need to prioritize their investments. What exactly specifically are you and Tanzu doing to really help companies navigate this very complex and still very early stage of Gen AI's sort of introduction into all of our lives?
No, thanks, Rick. I would say I would use the same framework I talked about earlier. We help customers develop, operate, and optimize their applications at scale. And so, from a development perspective, one of the problems that we see is, or before I get to the problem, from a development perspective, most use cases, as I mentioned, are on inference side or use of pre-trained models.
Yeah.
They are not about model building, right? Most of the use cases are
We
on
agree
premium. And that's,
100% on that. So,
yeah, 80% of the use cases are there. And now you pair it with most of the developers, most enterprise apps, about 60% of the enterprise apps are written in Java, right? And um, accessing these models, understanding how to instantiate these models, crossing the chasm, if you may, to this Python based world is hard for a lot of the enterprise developers. So, one of the innovation that we have brought to the table is something called Spring AI. And Spring AI is baked also into the Tanzu platform. So, what Spring AI does is it allows you to instantiate any model you want. Many, we have support for integrations with many models, many vector databases, but all through Java APIs. So now what you have is, as a Java developer, let us say you want to add a new capability that says, hey, I'm going to give a live chat interface with natural language capabilities. Inserting that into your business logic, Java business logic, becomes much easier. So that is kind of how we are accelerating the develop pillar. And then once the customer or the developer has developed, there is out of the box accelerators and templates that says, okay, we'll make sure it builds correctly, make sure it is secured, make sure it connects correctly, and so on. The second thing we are doing for AI is on the operate piece, where you need to have a model serving runtime. And Tanzu platform is perfect for that because it is not about one-time instantiation of the model. It's about how do you instantiate the model, but how do you scale it dynamically up and down based on the application needs, right? And that is what our, in fact, that capability is now out in GA, and we are or out in available in the market from our Tanzu platform, and we are seeing customers already adopt it. But within the platform now, you can instantiate the model, but as your applications get fed in, or as you're deploying your applications, the right level of performance and scale is maintained with that application runtime. And then the third one is a big one, which is you never ever in this case just do it one time and walk away, right? How do you optimize your application from a Gen AI perspective on a continuous basis? And that is where you're seeing an evolving space around observability. And this observability is not just about metrics and traces, but it is looking at the application platform, looking at the application, Gen AI applications, and measuring it in the right way and using evaluation techniques. And for evaluation, again, you're using LLMs. Because how do you figure out that a model is functioning well? Right? That is the type of observability and evaluation that is getting built into, and that's what we're working on. So the if you think about our standard framework of develop, operate, optimize, we are doing all of that for Gen AI based environments.
so that aligns. I mean, I can tell you conversations we've had. I was talking to a CIO and his leadership team at a major global manufacturer who touched about issue number one. Said like our biggest concern about going into AI is we don't believe we can actually link 80% of our application base
Yes.
into this work. And so we
Yes.
can give, so that's our biggest fear. I mean, that's one we've heard a lot. The second one is also very much tied into talking to a number of companies who have done a lot of use cases, who have done a lot of proof of concepts, and they were reasonably sized. Yes, we met our goal, we met our thing, but we just have long-term concerns about the cost of doing the full inferencing at scale that it's going to take to make this cost effective for us to
Yes.
deliver. And so that's their big concern, and things that allow them to do that. And as you say, the last one, observability, we've seen most companies, they're like, we absolutely need it. We have no idea where to start yet. So please help us with that. So,
No, that is almost perfect.
yeah.
And as we talked about it, since most customers are building RAG apps, the connectivity of data has become very important. How do I define enterprise
Mhm.
context? Do I have the right data
Mhm.
solutions
Mhm.
to model the enterprise context and deliver it to the platform in a dynamic basis?
Yeah,
And
and you even touched, this RAG and also vector are starting to come together. It's like
yes,
they were seen as isolation, but the progression we're hearing is they have to go forward
they
together
have
and
to go
more.
together. Correct. And an app platform
Mhm.
has to offer that capability out of the box.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. Rick, Purnima, thank you both so much for your insightful commentary and this great conversation. And thank you so much to our viewers for joining us. Goodbye, everyone.